suffering contests. How many of us are engaged in competition with our suffering versus others? Complaining is a form of comparing your suffering to the world around you. It's cathartic in a way to share it, and it brings up the story of my talk at Stanford a month ago or so, and I asked for the audience to reflect on why they originally decided to go to medical school, just as a reflective exercise, because so often we forget the original reasons that we do things. And one of the answers that I got from the audience was that this particular person was interested in observing and understanding the nature of suffering. And that was so fascinating to me, because one of my aversions to being in healthcare environments, in the form of hospitals and clinics, is that I just didn't like being around sick people. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I didn't want to be in these enclosed environments where people were contained for these conditions of, for sure, suffering. Although I don't think that I spent enough time going deep enough with any patient to understand the nature of their suffering. I remember my very first patient at the VA hospital, my very, very first patient ever, first month, third year medical student, July, internal medicine at the VA, was a woman who was HIV positive. So of course I was just terrified that, I was going to poke myself and contract something. But she was like, just this young woman, she was in her 30s, and she was a veteran. I didn't even ask her kind of what that was all about, how that story came about, or her relationship to her diagnosis and how that affected her, or how she found out, or any of it. And it was such a missed opportunity. But she didn't look to me that she was suffering. She was sort of matter-of-factly admitted to the hospital. Maybe she had been there many other times. And she wasn't fighting in terms of resisting. She was very much at peace. Which at the time, it didn't even register to me that that was notable. I was just trying to, do my job, not mess up as a student. But now I reflect on this reason that I was not interested in working in hospital environments, taking care of people in that way. And perhaps it's because I was very familiar with the nature of suffering in a certain way. Meaning that there was like a constant level of anxiety and stress in our house, and a worry and a fear about something unnameable in the future, something catastrophic that was bound to happen and never did, because we couldn't even name what it was. So if it were to happen, I'm not sure it would match up to the fear. But it just felt like I'd had enough of that, and I just knew, I had this kind of intuitive sense from observing other people and just actually feeling it, that there was something else to be experienced in life out there for me. And I didn't need any more education in the nature of suffering. I didn't want to go deeper there. I was actually much more interested in studying the nature of healing and the nature of joy and the nature of abundance and how that happens. And that's truly what I'm interested in. And I think in order to understand all of that, there's both sides of it. To understand healing, you have to understand the wound and the suffering. To understand joy, you have to understand pain. To understand freedom, you have to understand imprisonment. So it's all full circle. But it sort of explains to me why I've been gradually turning toward the light, so to speak. I think that I've explored abundance in terms of the physical manifestations of abundance: material, possessions, wealth, control, and power as forms of the opposite of suffering. And what I found is that it's not necessarily true that those conditions in the material world create any better internal state of non-suffering. It may have been created, in fact, through the same sort of anxiety and worry and obsession that I was trying to understand the opposite of. So then I turned toward, this idea of learning and growth and teaching and dealing with families, and also with extreme levels of material abundance. And wasn't there either. So, and just trying to tell people what to do, being in that position of control and power and domination, it didn't really do it for me either. So this part of my journey is about that, for me, filling in the blanks in terms of, okay, if it's not, I'm not interested in replaying the same cycle of worry and suffering and anxiety and clinging to conditions that never actually change the internal experience. And I know that it's not about creating those conditions, because that in and of itself doesn't do anything. It's about finding that middle place of how do you create the internal experience first that's not attached to any of those conditions, that doesn't care whether you're succeeding or failing, but only that you're doing it from that internal place that I'm calling joy, peace, and freedom. I don't go there and call it love, because love is so tied to fear and obligation and sacrifice in my mind, because that's how I was sort of educated to think about it. So I call it joy, peace, and freedom. I think of it as trying to experience unconditional internal experiences that are very simple and very everyday and very accessible. Like sitting on this bench here, again, enjoying the view of the bay and the color of the sky. And how can I take that with me into the world in whatever I do? And it's imprinting that feeling, because I'm so easily hooked by circumstances and my worrying that I have to practice this and commit to this every day in order to live the life that I intend. So that's where I am right now. That was a kind of a moment of clarity that I wanted to share. Hope you have a great one.